Greetings, I'm Demonac. I was going to try to briefly explain all about the Kua Toa in TDDC, from invisibility cloaks to fish ogres, in about 3 minutes. That didn't work. So instead you get this huge podcasty thing. This is the basics on Kua Toa. Spoiler, the Deluvians are really, really evil, flat out monstrous, and if you don't like to think about violent stuff, you may want to skip this one. You've been warned. And everyone else is going to hear this and then wonder why I even bothered with the warning. The beginning. In the beginning, when the world was young, the goddess of slaughter and the depths, Blibal, looked at the races of the ocean, choosing one to conquer the Fadelands, and maybe beyond. She looked at many species, but the Kua Toa were fully amphibious, able to breathe air as well as water, and their cruel ambition won over the storm goddess. And so Blibal bequeathed onto the Kua Toa a fragment of her own power, not a large fraction, but still a big sacrifice for an eternal deity, because once the power was given, it could never be taken back. This gift explains the KT's bizarre ultra vision, gave me an excuse for reverting to the ridiculous electrical resist they had before it was nerfed in 3.5 edition, and many other boons, some as subtle as improved ability to control their chemical skin secretions, some as outrageous as the powerful connection that a tiny percentage of Kua Toa developed to their chi energy, which allowed the rise of superpowered monitors. And Blibal made sure the Kua knew who was responsible for their new awesomeness. They formed a new theocratic government, where the emperor was a non-hereditary position appointed for life by the priests. For life as in, if he failed, they'd have him killed. And those priests drove an empire which had two purposes: to expand through slaughter, and to provide blood sacrifices for Blibal. As you know, the Deluvian Empire was tremendously successful, fighting bloody war after bloody savage war, expanding their territory, and enslaving the other aquatic races one after another. Now, the Kua were soon badly outnumbered by their own slaves, so just as a paranoid precaution, they built their main cities and their capital on land, because they are 100% amphibious, whereas few other aquatic races can survive out of water for even a couple hours. I should note that I actually tweaked several to reduce their out-of-water time even further. Just about the only other fully amphibious sentients in the setting are the Aventi, who are pretty much humans with gills, and because of that, they were butchered even more brutally by the Deluvians. Very few of them survive, most of whom live as slaves in the Imperial Palace. Other Deluvian surface cities have no slaves at all. Lots of swimming pools, no slaves. And they built a huge, powerful, and evil economy on the back of slave labor, as well as using the slaves as cannon fodder, because they're such nice guys. And being so successful, they offered greater and greater sacrifices to Blibal. In Vulbal, the City of Blood, there is a road a kilometer long between the Munbaru Temple and the Imperial Palace. The road is lined on both sides with the skulls of conquered peoples, of more than 24 sentient species, with skulls of giants at each end. The entire lane is paved with a half-inch thickness of gold, from end to end, skull to skull, and they call it the Ubu Road, a word that means victory, though in the Kuar language, victory and butchery are virtual synonyms. And every 10th year, on the day of the divine gift, the priestesses begin to sacrifice slaves on the temple altar, and they do not stop until the blood runs down the steps, down the golden road, until a drop of that blood reaches the palace step. A note on slavery. Slavery is an utterly vile, unquestionably evil institution. You may notice that slavery is a relatively common theme in my campaign world, but I will say flat out that slavery is banned, reviled, and in practice non-existent in all the kingdoms of men, elves, dwarves, halflings, Eladrin, and anyone else decent. I love putting in difficult moral issues for my players to struggle with, hard decisions, but I don't like to imply any ambiguity about how evil slavery is. The main gray areas the PCs have to deal with in regards to slavery are: how do you deal with enemy combatants who are fighting against their will, and how do you deal with the allies, like the Illud, who are, strategically speaking, on your side, very powerful, and mostly trustworthy in the context of a massive generational war, but are also unabashed slavers? That's not an easy question. From invis cloaks to fish ogres. Kua Toa in the books have several abilities based on secreting chemicals. They can make goo that they put on shields, which traps enemy weapons, disarming enemies. Of course, having a big heavy weapon stuck to it also renders the shield useless. My Kua used that to great advantage early in their history, but it has fallen out of favor now that they consider their own master-crafted gears to be superior. Kua also have slippery secretions, which grant a huge bonus to their escape artist skills. They can slip right out of shackles and bonds, as well as wrestling holds. But one of the Deluvian ruling houses, House Lokolo, began experimenting with the properties of their skin secretions using alchemy, and they found their bloodline could produce a rare chemical which eventually led to the creation of the first Kolos cloak, a cloak which could turn the user invisible for minutes at a time. Later, improved versions could even work for an hour or more. Within 100 years, the Kolos had proven to be a powerful weapon of dominance. It could be mass-produced for a couple hundred gold, and yet it was a weapon which could not be used effectively for infighting due to the KT's innate ability to see the invisible. And the High Priestess had a vision from Blibal that House Lokolo was to be dissolved with great honor and interbred with the other houses until 5 centuries after that. Virtually every single Kua Toa can secrete the substance that powers the Kolos cloaks. And from then on, any child who could not do so by the time they came of age was sacrificed to avoid diluting the blood of Lokolo. The breaking up of House Lokolo was a unique event, one that was never repeated. But since their alchemical breakthrough, the various other houses started experimenting as well, and some found their own special abilities. Most are mundane, like several houses who are renowned for their fine fabrics or for their metallurgy, and then there was House Babago. Nobody knows what the heck they were doing, but end result, they look like somebody slept with an ogre. Their large size and grotesque appearance pushed them to the edges of Deluvian society, making them one of the first groups to sign on with the Illud conspirators. Every kind of war. I'm sure somebody out there wants to call me out on the absurd hyperbole of saying that the conflict between the Deluvians and the Illud has elements of a civil war, World War I, and World War II. Well, let's run through it. A civil war is pretty obvious. Frankly, the KTs were much more brutal than the American Civil War. I had a paragraph explaining the difference, but it was too disturbing, so just take my word for it. The war also resembles World War I's trench warfare in the sense that taking any meaningful amount of ground and holding it is nigh impossible. The reason here is a little different than the trenches, though. It's really about the Leviathan Mountains. Being underwater, traversing the massive mountain range isn't all that hard, and in fact, attacking down the other side is fairly effective. The problem is, when you do capture some ground on the far side of the mountains, you find yourself surrounded by enemies, and your own supply lines have to go up and down a mountain, making it nigh impossible to hold on to any gains that you make. There's also a World War II aspect, in my eyes anyway, because you have two nations in total war mode, each struggling to train, equip, and maintain more soldiers and inflict more attrition than the other side. Espionage is important. There's a little bit of technological advancement angle as they try to devise more powerful or cheaper and more efficient magical items. Plus, the three-dimensionality of the ocean in some ways simulates the aerial combat aspect, making possible damaging raids deep into enemy territory, with patrols and magic divination trying to intercept the enemy raids from above. And that's the basics on the Kua Toa. I could tell you how the KT Civil War also has aspects of the Cold War, but that'll be a story for another day. If you care about game rules and stats and stuff, check out the forums. I've posted the stats to the enemies they fought in the Drow Mines, plus the Warforged Robot Lumberjack, and I'm going to toss in a link to the original setting document that I gave the players for character creation. Have a question? Drop me a comment. And don't forget to subscribe to my Twitter at TalesDDC.